Welcome to WNHH FM 103.5 Just in Time Conversations. I'm your host, Justin Farmer, inviting you to be in community with us about conversations and ideas that matter. Today, our guest is Greg Coleridge of the National Co-Director of Move to Amend Coalition. Thank you so much for being in community with us.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you, Justin, for all your good work and for your interest in ours.
We had the pleasure of being in community in person many moons ago. Um, what before getting into all the things, what brought you to this very important work around securing one one voice, one vote? How did you get from the activism before to, move to amend?
Yeah, well, again, thank you so much for the invitation to be with you, and thanks to those who are listening in. I guess the simple answer is that for many years, about 30 some in fact, worked for a organization called the American Friends Service Committee. It's a Quaker-related social action, peace, justice, humanitarian organization, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize back in 1947, along with the British Friends. And doing that work in Northeast Ohio in the Midwest, I was doing sort of the conventional, traditional kind of activism work of trying to resist, respond, react to the latest problems going on economically, politically, socially, in terms of war, peace, threats to Mother Earth, and the like. And in that work, it just sort of occurred to me that, man, I'm spending a whole heck of a lot of time constantly responding, reacting, resisting, playing defense, as we oftentimes are playing defense. Now, I don't know about you, but in sports and in life, playing defense is it's important. But if all you're playing defense, if all you do is ever play defense, you will never, right, play offense. You will never sort of try to change, try to be in control, trying to more or less have the power and the authority to make things right as you would want to do. And so, I got mixed up with a group, New England-based group called the Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy, or POCLAD for short. POCLAD.org is the POCLAD.org is the website. And it's sort of a think tank for frustrated activists that felt that, we as activists, whether it's, labor activists or environmental activists or consumer activists, we're always playing defense. We're always reacting and not proacting. And part of that had to do with the fact that it's because the rules of the game are stacked against us. Our government isn't broken, but rather it's fixed, as in rigged to benefit the wealthy, super duper wealthy few and corporations. And it was that understanding that, was sort of an aha experience. It said, wow, I've got to think more about not just trying to put out, this fire or that fire, but metaphorically ask, who are the damn arsonists out there that are causing all of these fires, that are resulting in it? And it's important to do firefighting. Hey, this is Fire Prevention Week, by the way, nationally. So, it's important. We have to put out fires, right? But if all we do is constantly do that kind of reactive work and helping people who need to, be pulled in their animals and things out of burning homes, and we're never, ever asking how we got in it and who are setting these fires, then we'll always, forever and ever be responding and reacting. So, hey, I don't know about others, but I don't have time to just constantly react. I want to proact, and I want to be on the offensive, and I want to be in a position where I and others who I care about and I love in my community who I work with are in charge, setting the rules of the game that affirm life and dignity and justice in all of its forms in a livable world. And democracy. That's what democracy is all about.
That I every time you said PRO-act, I just kept thinking of the PRO-act,
Ah,
the labor rights. But I thank you for that. I have known about Move to Amend for probably the better part of 6 years. Um, but what is Move to Amend? Even more importantly, how can connect with the great work that y'all are doing?
well, Move to Amend is an outfit that's been around since January 2010, the very day, in fact, of the famous or infamous Citizens United Supreme Court, Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission Supreme Court decision that expanded the power, political power, and constitutional rights of well-to-do people and corporate entities to corrupt our political process, particularly elections, by drowning out, if you will, sadly using the current, example or metaphor of hurricanes, through the tsunami of hurricanes of so much money just uh, which was, rampant before Citizens United, but certainly since 2010 has just escalated profoundly in our political process. So several months prior to the Citizens United decision, a number of people sort of came together who were, sort of like many activists, again, doing that reactive work, important work as it was, but sort of seeing where the court was headed at that time and felt that we needed to do something that sought to what looked like was going to be this horrible decision by this very small minority, and it was a minority, basically a bare majority of the court, 5-4 decision. So that court ruled very controversial, one of the most controversial decisions maybe ever by the court in the last couple generations. And so Move to Amend was born, and its goal from day one was to not just tackle and take on and try to overturn the Citizens United decision, but to understand that the power of money in elections and the power of corporate entities to dictate what goes on in elections, but also in our lives, in our communities, our county, our state, our nation, goes way back even a century before. So the mission from day one of this organization that came together was to overturn Citizens United and to overturn money being defined as free speech and to deal with this whole nonsense and craziness and bizarre sense and very much anti-democratic notion that a corporation is a person. So Move to Amend has been designed from day one to tackle these two constitutional doctrines that one, money equals free speech, which is crazy. If money is speech, those who have the most money have the most speech. Not real democratic, is it? More like a plutocracy or monocracy. And number two, to deal with the equally bizarre, maybe even more bizarre constitutional doctrine that a corporation is a person, which is not true. It was not meant to be from day one in this country. It was a conscious and deliberate decision by the High Court, the Supreme Court, going all the way back to the 1880s, and has just been um, horrible in its negative impact toward people, places, and the planet ever since then. So Move to Amend was born then. It is a national organization that seeks to, amend the Constitution and really to use what we call the We the People Amendment. It's a sort of a proactive effort to try to do what I mentioned Move to Amend is trying to accomplish, to revoke corporate constitutional rights and money defined as free speech. So it has been introduced in Congress. And, as an organization, we have been working as a national organization with local support. And we have grounded our work, and I'll sort of end it here. We grounded our work from day one in an important number of values that we hold dear in not just how we think and not just how we speak, but in what we do. And those include being accountable and responsible, both personally and organizationally, being completely transparent, being focused on trying to build up community, because you just can't be top down. You got to be bottom up, focusing on building community, and building a movement, because we're never going to bring about the change we need given how the political system is hijacked the way it is, unless we have the power that movements have created throughout the history of our country. And finally, to be incredibly committed to being both politically and economically independent, which go together. Because if we are controlled or influenced in any way by well-to-do individuals, by political parties, by big corporations, by big foundations, you name it, then we're not going to be able to be as independent and as committed and accountable to people on the ground as we think we should be. And finally, we're very importantly committed to anti-oppression in all of its forms, whether it's race, gender, physical ability, sexual orientation, within ourselves, communities, policies, and the like, because we know from day one, we the people have never been all the people, and democracy is pretty shallow if certain people have never authentically been included in we the people, which to this day many groups have not. So we have to deal with the many isms that have been from day one very anti-democratic.
That the I always struggle with, how you do the work from the inside, outside, all the sides, and have been in the belly of the beast, at least at the local level, have always, wondered how you build, a different system. So in an ideal world, what would getting money out of politics looks like? Here in Connecticut, we have a public financing program for our state elections. But look like, what would, getting money out of politics look like? Would it look like something like public financing at the national level? Would it look like something different? Would it, like, what, you know, if I made you the democracy chair for the day, what would you do?
So if I was the dictator for the day, huh? For don't know whoever said that, but anyway. Um, well, I begin with the notion that, hey, money in politics is incredibly corrosive and corrupting in its impact and its effect, and has been, because big money in elections, oftentimes from whatever source, really does it not yield being less a contribution and more like an investment when you're starting to throw around big money, unless it's from your aunt or uncle or something, okay, maybe, but they may even want something, who knows? But usually when it comes in big chunks like that, people are looking for something in return. And that's what investment is about. And politics has certainly become that with the big players, whether they're the major CEOs or heads of other organizations, or just individuals who want tax breaks or perks, or low interest loans, personally or whatever, that they're looking for something from that public official. So as important as that is, that certainly is not the only key to having an authentic, legitimate, real democracy, which I think we've never had. So this would be to try to create an authentic democracy, quote unquote, for the very first time. Would be nice, wouldn't it? Instead of the myth and the lore that we have now, because that's what it is. It's sort of, a myth that we have this that has existed from the beginning. But certainly things can be dramatically improved if we had a better system, and that better system, you in Connecticut have gotten to the extent of what can be done within the confines of the rules of the game, have tried through a system of voluntary public financing, because it has to be voluntary, right? Because again, of this 1976 Supreme Court decision called Buckley versus Vallejo that sort of equated money as free speech. And so if you have money, free speech, you can't limit, how much money can be spent in an election. You can't limit how long a campaign for election would be. Wouldn't that be nice instead of a political election that goes, 2, 3, sometimes, my God, 4 years between one presidential race to another? You could just say, like a number of countries, all right, we're going to have a political campaign that goes 2 months, and here's the maximum amount of money that can be spent. Here's the maximum amount of money that can be raised from an individual if we want private funding, or if we want to take private money out of the political system altogether. Because if you think about it, most of the rest of the political system is, at least on paper, public. Uh, People get in office, they meet in public, they have offices in the public city hall. A good deal of what they do from beginning to end is public, with one gigantic exception, and that's raising money to be a quote unquote viable candidate, which is for the most part still private or slash corporate or slash plutocratic. So, as a number of people and communities have tried to do in part or in whole within the confines of, it can't be mandatory, it can only be a voluntary, like in Connecticut. I think Maine had a system similar to it. North Carolina, I think, has a system of public financing for just judges. Arizona for a while had it. And, if you adhere, as folks in Connecticut, I think you operate this way, correct me if I'm wrong. If you collect a certain amount of small, sort of quote unquote qualifying contributions, it shows you're a legit candidate. You can then be eligible for whatever the amount is. And in some places, then, if your opponent didn't buy into that system and he, she, or they raised more than that, you could be eligible for a certain amount, limited, of extra amount. Now, that was challenged in Arizona, where that existed as, hey, that's violating my First Amendment right of free speech, because money is speech, as a candidate who was raising private money. And that second amount of money got thrown out. So if you throw that out, it makes sort of the reason to want to opt in originally that less, um, I would say, less supportive or enticing. Because if your opponent is, you don't have to raise equal amount. You don't have to win the money war, but you certainly have to have a limited amount of money, a minimum amount to be decent and to qualify, and the rest, you try to offset by hitting the pavement. So, my hope would be that in my, dictatorship or Democrat for the day would be really public financing, full public financing, in which you take out the private system altogether. Maybe if you do have a system, you do what now a number of communities are doing or trying to get on the ballot. You give a certain small number or you give a certain people or everybody a small amount of money that they can use for a voucher. I mean, that's been done or being talked about in a number of places. So one or the other, or some combination, so that people can decide their $25 or $50 how they want it all to go to, you, Justin, running for state Senate as you once did, or you could divide it up in $25 chunks to two different people, something along those lines. But just get rid of private money altogether.
For those of y'all who are just joining us, you're listening to Just in Time Conversation, WNHH FM 103.5, here with Greg Coolidge of the National Move to Amend Coalition. You know, I felt so proud of myself when we ran for state senate. We, on average, got $24, and I want to say like 80 cents donations was the average. So I felt great beating Bernie. And you know, we had 700, almost 800 donations
Hmm.
to raise 20 something thousand dollars, which was a feat for me, for the community. But I think about how, you know, we have public financing for the state level, but for the local level, we don't have public financing. And then for our cabinets, the governorship, right, the lieutenant governor, uh, you know, Secretary of State, oftentimes they opt out of public financing. Um, and so that really limits who are in these seats of powers, as you were talking about. Um, before you were talking about we the people have never really uh, had the democracy that we profess that we do. Um, and so talking about getting money out of pocket, out of politics, talking about we the people, can you tell us more about we the people amendment and the movement to move that piece of legislation along?
Yeah, and just to finish up the other thing, you could have full public financing of every election at every level of government, let's say, but you would still have to deal with this issue of outside dark money or quote unquote independent expenditures that sometimes are not so independent, right? They're the guy who used to be the campaign chair of the candidate then moves over and starts a super PAC, political action committee that nod, wink, wink is supposed to be independent, but is in cahoots with that candidate and that candidate's campaign. That for the most part, those kind of super PACs don't run supportive ads for that candidate they're working with, but rather they flip the script and run these misinformation or disinformation attack ads. So it's just become such a horrible, and oftentimes, if it's coming from 501(c)(4) organizations, they don't have to uh, disclose where the money's coming from. So they can be as dirty and as salacious as they want because they don't have to be accountable. You don't know who they are, and so they don't have to, their name can stay pristine because they're not the ones that are tossing the mud against the other candidates. So, somehow we've got to deal with that independent expenditure. And so the We the People Amendment, HR 54, is sort of an effort to try to say, look, money is not speech, money is property. That's how it's been, if money is speech, those who have the most money have the most speech, and you're not going to get anywhere authentically democratically if that's the case. So we need to look at money as it once was, closely defined, rigidly controlled, and money is not defined anywhere in the original Constitution under the First Amendment as speech. It's just like your land, your automobile, or a toaster oven or any other of your personal possessions. It is an asset. It is a possession. It is no more has a right to speak than my wheelbarrow does. It's a thing. And so the same with a corporation. Corporations are given the right to speak under the First Amendment under a 1970 decision. And so, this is a corporate creation. So a creation of the state. And so what the We the People Amendment would do, and you can go to movetomen.org. That's our website, movetomen.org/amendment. And there you will find the We the People Amendment. And basically there's just, a couple of real basic components to it. It just basically says, Article 1, that money, or that Article 1 is that corporations are not persons. It just comes down to the basic fact that the rights and the basic wording just says the rights and privileges protected by the Constitution of the United States are the rights and privileges of natural persons only. So corporate entities, which, you look at the First Amendment, you look at anywhere in the Constitution, no mention of corporate entities at all. It is just created out of thin air by the Supreme Court back in the 1880s. And so, it used to be that corporations were created by states like Connecticut and Rhode Island and Massachusetts because they were constitutionalized. Previously, these entities, these corporate uh, entities were creations of the king to do the king's business, things like the Massachusetts Bay Company, the Carolina Company, the Virginia Company. and the like. And they were given the power and the rights and anointed to have these powers and rights, both economic and political, to do the king's business, political and economic, on the side of the Atlantic, in the colonies. And they were ruling, they were dominating. So the revolution in this country from day one, as imperfect as it was, nevertheless got that right in saying, no, we're going to constitutionalize these things. We're going to transform the Massachusetts Bay Company into the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Virginia Company into the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Carolina Company into the state of Carolina, which became North and South Carolina. And so these then became, controlled by us, we the people, again, as imperfect as it was, only given to white male property owners originally, which was about 5 to 8% of the population of the country from day one. But what they got right in all of that was that, okay, we still, people still wanted to do business, so they wanted some sort of protection. And so corporations were granted by the state legislature one at a time for a very specific purpose. And just as they were created for that purpose to build a canal, a road, whatever the case may be, that purpose did not include being involved in trying to corrupt legislators by donating money or in any other way being involved in politics. So it's very rigid. And so that is what this amendment would do in part in section 1 is say, no, we're going to go back. We're going to say that only human beings are covered under the Bill of Rights and under the 14th Amendment. They were not intended for corporate entities. And then section 2 is saying that, Congress should have the power to define what money is and to define how much money should be in elections. And so the section 2 of the amendment says federal, state, and local government shall regulate, limit, or prohibit contributions and expenditures. So that's how it used to be, that it used to be up to our elected officials, our representatives, to define how much money was going to be spent in elections, whether or not it was going to be a little bit, a lot, what sources and the like. But all of that was usurped or trumped, here I say, by the Supreme Court when the Supreme Court decided that corporate entities were persons and money is speech. So what this would do is, in essence, go back to giving the power of our local, certainly power to Congress, power to state legislators, and even power to city councils, where they have home rule authority to define the amount of money or whether there should be private money at all. And maybe they want at the local level or in the state of Connecticut, all of elections to be, at the state level, publicly financed. We'll leave it to our elected officials, and it should be said where in those states, and there's, I think, 28 states that allow citizen-driven ballot initiatives, to allow those citizen-driven ballot initiatives to decide, what, if our state legislature or our local city council is going to sit on their hands and do nothing, then we, the people, are going to circulate a legal petition to get something on the ballot to say whatever it is they want to say. So we, the people, will once again be in charge, or maybe for the very first time, in this case, be in charge of deciding how much money should be in elections and whether corporate entities should have any role whatsoever in our politics.
No, I appreciate the work, the sentiment. One of the questions I was going to ask you that you just answered was, whether money should corporate influence should extend to ballot initiatives, because we've seen the fights for right to repair or Uber or Lyft be challenged, where you have this dark money that you were talking about, hundreds of millions poured into these campaigns to say it's not in the best interest of people to have common sense protections, to have rights to workers respected, so on and so forth. What does it give you pause, or does it give you concern that, in this election cycle, I feel like every other election cycle, we see record donations coming to these campaigns. Camilla Harris, right, is on the ballot, and You know, she is raising unprecedented amounts of money, and I can see some people arguing that with the times changing, with the different platforms that you have to reach out to get airtime, to get in front of voters, constituents, that, you know, we shouldn't have a ceiling per se because that limits the access to candidates. What would you say to those arguments about limiting the amount of money and this ceiling ever increasing?
Yeah, well, you're quite right. That each and every election sets a new benchmark, whether it's midterm to midterm or general to general. And I think this election, when all the dollars come in, it's estimated upwards of maybe $14 billion will be spent on the federal elections, which, will surpass, I don't know what it was in 2020, 11 maybe, something like that, or 10. So it is. There's no end in sight. And again, whether it's corruption, or I mean, whether it's contributions or whether it's investments, a lot of this money certainly has come in small contributions. When you go out there, and because of social media and the access to platforms now, you're able to, on Facebook or Twitter, or my TwitFace, whatever your platforms are, you can appeal to them, and Instagram and the like, and get the $5, $10, whatever. So all that's to the good. But it's when it comes in the gigantic chunks. And we're seeing that by the, well-to-do people and industry. And, you mentioned presidential candidates. If you just look at the oil and gas industry alone, which is connected, I should say. I know up in your fair state, there's been concern for quite a long time about the political influence of the insurance industry. And the insurance, because you're, headquarters, right, of insurance, you're the Vatican City of insurance corporations in the U.S., if not, Western world. And there's been all sorts of legitimate and important work at trying to focus on the role that the insurance industry plays in promoting climate destruction by underwriting, right? These fossil fuel corporations and what is it? Um, Underwriting their expansion projects that have driven the climate crisis. And there's been quite a bit, I know, of ongoing concern about that and trying to do actions in front of the Hartfords and Travelers and the likes. Well, the fossil fuel industry and the insurance industry are right up there in donating, or more like investing in the political system. And it's just it's quite troubling actually to see how much money has gone to these entities. And if you just look at it's like Trump and Harris are like one and two. Trump, and this is just in the current election cycle, has received something on the order of one top 15 recipients. Yeah, Trump is number one in over $1 million just from fossil fuel industry, and Harris 661. Or no, I'm sorry, $6 million, and Trump has gotten like over 1 billion. Am I right? No, $1 million, and Harris $661,000. And Cruz is up there, and Haley's been up there, and Johnson. All the main decision makers are candidates running for president just from this industry alone, and that doesn't include the insurance industry, which supplements it. So we're talking about huge amounts of money that are fueling, in essence, climate destruction, and that just makes the We the People Amendment so much more important. We've got so far, this has been introduced in Congress by Pramila Jayapal, representative in Washington State. And we have 87 co-sponsors so far. Only one person, this being House members anyway, one from Connecticut, and that being DeLauro, who's an important person. But we've tried to reach out to many of the other reps in your fair state and have gotten, I don't think, very far. in trying to, get them to come on board and be a co-sponsor. We've reached out to Heinz, and Larson was uh, he didn't respond at all, but Courtney was somewhat interested. So if any of your listeners are interested in, joining us and trying to reach out to any of your representatives to try to get them to join the 87 co-sponsor of the We the People Amendment, hit me up. My email is greg, Greg, at movetoamend.org. Greg, Greg, at movetoamend.org. I know there's some other people from labor who have been trying to work. They helped get Delora on board. She being a strong labor person. I know there, are one or two others, but we calls with DC aides of these persons. And, we have this movement that's really trying to move the ball down the field around this. More than 780 organizations have endorsed our effort, and more than 700 communities across the country have taken a position in support, either by resolution or ballot initiative. So it is an effort, and it is growing, but we're up against, the powers to be that obviously love the system is working perfectly and wonderfully for the big
Mm.
money people and for the corporations because they're getting what they want. Why invest in new, investment in my company when I can just get the public officials, to be less public and more listen to me and game the system to where I'm the only competitor, I'm the monopoly, the monopolist, and by doing so, I can raise my prices. And I know I'm not going to be regulated. I know I'm not going to be called on the carpet because I've got, I've bought, lent, rented, leased, or retained public officials to where they're not going to make me accountable. So we have a system of a crony capitalism as a result of the corruption of our political process.
No, I totally agree with you. I, I hear this argument all the time from people that things have gotten better, right? Things have just intrinsically gotten better, and the, you know, the pendulum is moving to the left, and it's going to keep moving and keep swinging, and progress is going to continue to be made. Um, you know, in the 14 years that Move to Amend has been an entity, um, and in your time on these issues, do you see things getting better? Do you see things staying the same? And what are the things that people can be hopeful towards in terms of moving the pendulum?
Yeah. Well, my goodness, certainly the crises we were facing, and I use that word in a plural term and not singular, crises, are growing and becoming more lethal, and are not singular, but they intersect. It's like taking your prescription drugs, maybe each one of them, if you take them separately, okay, they all have side effects, of course, but you hope the positive when you take whatever it is you're taking outweighs the negative, the side effect. But when you start taking three or four of them together, you don't know, do you, what the intersection is of the negative effects of those three or four drugs are the negative, and they can compound and literally be lethal to your health, safety, and body. And so it is with these crises we're facing: the ecological, the political, the constitutional, the social, the economic. The hurricane that, of course, now we're dealing with, the second in 2 weeks, that is driven by the increased in temperature of the air, which was driven literally by the climate change resulting from fossil fuel burning of carbon that is done and been done by the fossil fuel industry that knew full well for 50 years ago, as well as it should be said, the insurance industry knowing 50 years ago that this was happening, but nevertheless doing nothing and realizing they can get away with it again if they influence the body politic to where nothing is going to fundamentally be changed. We're not going to keep the fossil fuels in the ground. We're not going to focus on alternative energy or alternative forms of transportation or focus on, the greatest form energy saving, which is conservation. We don't do that like we do. Keep it as it is, which is going to be incredibly profitable. So, to keep things as they are in that way has been, incredibly potent for them to just continue going down the track that they are. And so that has definitely gotten worse, both individually, all of those individual crises, and now synergistically gotten worse. And it's going to continue. What's the saying that you're likely to, as Chinese saying, you're likely to end up where you're headed. Well, my friends, where the heck are we headed right now? It ain't a pretty place. When you just look at sort of the macro real world conditions in all of those situations. And we even have less sort of ability, power, and authority to rule, to self-govern, to self-determinate, to have the right to decide, because all of that has been captured by money in politics, but also by these corporate constitutional rights that go beyond money in politics, that include Fourth Amendment search and seizure rights and Fifth Amendment takings rights, and maybe the most grotesque capturing or hijacking of constitutional rights is the 14th Amendment that was designed to provide newly freed slaves the power and the right of due process and equal protection. It was hijacked by corporate entities to protect themselves in many different ways. So, that kind of stuff is getting far worse. What's better is the awareness. You have now greater aware part of it because of people connecting the dots, seeing that, my God, part of why we have the fueling of the climate crisis is because these corporations are out of control. Corporations fill in the blank corporations, whether it's energy corporations or healthcare. Why don't we have healthcare, the kind that people want? Why don't we have a clean environment? Why don't we have fill in the blank, in which over and over again there's this massive disconnect, in which what people want is on one end of the spectrum and the kind of policies we have or don't have is at the other end. Most people want sort of a healthcare system that is affordable, comprehensive, and transferable, but we don't have that, unlike basically every other Western country on planet Earth, except the United States, because the pharmaceutical and insurance and hospital corporations have sort of locked down the system that's profitable. So that disconnect, people are waking up to that as well. So that is quite, I think, positive. And the movement that is taking place, yeah, there are still to some extent movements that are reactive and responsive, but they're dealing now with issues that are not just, hey, sort of stop this one horrible thing going on. They're starting to make, why is this one horrible thing? Whether it's Dakota Access Pipeline, whether it's because we don't have, climate fossil fuels that are continuing to be burned, or because we don't have health care, or because, we can't have our student loans paid for when, it should be written off. Why can't it be? Just issue after issue, problem after problem. Why don't we have it? Well, because we're not in charge. The game is rigged. The system is not broken, but rather fixed. And so how can we fix the system? And so there's lots of ways out there now that people are looking at it. And certainly the climate crisis people are looking at, hey, we got to get the banks to disinvest. That is one step that is removed from just being reactive and responsive to trying to stop, a tractor or a group coming in, a company coming in and polluting a river or whatever. So that's sort of moving up the scale to something that is more fundamental, more at the root, more radical. And what is radical but looking at the root causes of something? That's the dictionary definition. So there is more of a radical sense of what's going on. And so that's very positive to the extent that people are getting more connecting to what we're doing. To some extent, it is true. We have more support than we've ever had before. There's more than 520,000 people have signed our petition. You can go to movetomend.org/motion, MOTION, to sign it. So there's more support for that. There's more support for things like ending gerrymandering, which is, I think, also one of these root causes. If we're talking about, again, not just dealing with the firefighting, but also who are the arsonists, and some of the arson causing things are corporate constitutional rights, money being defined as free speech, but also things like gerrymandering. God, people are really now concerned about that. But also, really, if you look about it, some of the gamed systems and things inherent in our own Constitution, things like the Electoral College, that we don't have one person, one vote in this country, that has resulted in this outrageous system in which, most presidents from the year 2000 to the present are those who have not been elected, uh, who have won the popular vote, with one exception. So, there's much greater awareness now of some constitutional things that need to happen that even transcend the We the People Amendment. That is a good thing, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon. Whether it gets far enough, fast enough to where we can fundamentally change things before we can is an open question. And so it's up to us, really. The bottom line is, yes, we need people on the inside, people we elect to represent us, to be our friends, to be our mouths and voices in the inside of this corrupt political system. Yeah, we need those people, but they need us, and they can only do so much inside this system. And it only is going to happen if there is a powerful, independent, and authentically inclusive democracy movement that we've never seen really in this country. The populace of the 1870s and 1890s, was kind of there, sort of. It missed out in a couple of areas. The Black Lives movement was the greatest in terms of numbers of people ever in the history of this country. So there are these movements, and the women's movement is going on, the environmental movement is going on, the youth movement is going on, but they've not yet sort of come together to say whatever it is that we're trying to oppose. Maybe the ultimate bottom line movement is, until we have a real democracy, we ain't going to get anywhere on these issues and concerns in our respective movements that we really do care about, metaphorically, beyond first base. So let's think about maybe whatever it is we're working on, that we continue to work on that, but we also figure out how to come together and having this super duper movement that focusing on creating a real authentic democracy, which we've never had. And would it be nice to have that for the very first time?
I dream, wish, pray. And, as we come to the end of our time, um, you know, my you beautifully answered, right? That movement is still alive, that people are organizing, people are collaborating and thinking of new ways of fighting interlocking oppression. Um, you know, how do we take from the past and the energy and the wisdom and the teachings of the past and bring them to the present? And the work that you're doing, how are you connecting, that intergenerational work
Yeah.
to move along these projects that are really, I'm hoping I will see these changes in my lifetime, um, but they might take longer, and we also might not have that time. So how do you see that from your vantage point?
There's a lot of lessons, both good and bad, that we can learn from the past in this country and from our brothers and sisters abroad, both in the past, but in terms of what's going on in the present, in
Mm,
conditions that in many cases are a lot more overtly violent. I mean, they're incredibly violent in this country, and some of it overt, some of it, you know, absolutely physically violent. But still, the people of privilege, white people and males, and we haven't, and I speak as a white male, older man, that I've not seen, as my brothers and sisters who are of different colors and different races and different sexual orientations being treated both physically and emotionally and systemically as violent as they have, both in this country and in many places around the world. Much, much worse, as we're seeing right now in the Middle East and elsewhere. So there's a lot to learn about what we need to do uh, in sort of the abstract, but also what we need to do to protect ourselves. Because darn well, as many people who've been involved and are involved, that they come out. They try to infiltrate. They try to divide and conquer. There's multiple ways that the powers to be in our country have worked to break up movement that start becoming successful, as well as just using brute force, as they did against the Panthers, and they continue to do against movements of today, the environmental movement of out west and in many other places. So we need to understand how the powers to be will externally threaten us, but also internally the ego, of course, there will always be ego, but my gosh, it just seems like our culture has the John Waynes and the Jane Waynes and the like. Oh, it builds upon and it sort of gives that we individually can sort of bring about this massive change all by ourselves. Hey, individually, at certain times have been tipping points, but they've only become tipping points where the Sojourner Truth have done what they've done, and other people have done what they've done because of what's happened beforehand, because of what's led up to it that's been collective. So we have to figure out how to act in community and how we can act together to support ourselves as we work at the macro level doing micro. And so things like mutual aid, things like at the local level, as all hell breaks loose and maybe falls apart dysfunctionally and dystopianly at the federal level, we need to figure out ways to support one another locally and to use those local kinds of groups as building blocks to focus on what we can do to bring about macro change at the community level or at the state level or at the national level. So we need both macro and micro. We need both being better persons individually and being better change agents at a macro level.
And my last, as we have like a minute left, my favorite question to always ask people is, what's a song that they can leave us with to remember them by?
Well, Imagine by Lennon, or It's a Beautiful Day by U2, or take your pick.
Hey,
Maybe Imagine because, certainly what has been inevitable in one period of time has become, or what has been impossible in what one period of time in our history has become inevitable at a later time. And I think, that's the sort of imagination, creativity, hope, but commitment. Because it ain't going to happen. Whatever happens positively ain't going to happen by itself. It's only going to happen when we, the people, step up. It's up to us ultimately.
thank you so much, Greg, for being in community with us. Um, uh, you know, we thank you for your time. Move to Amend, check them out.
Go to movetomen.org/motion, MOTION, if you want to sign up and be part of this growing movement that's doing a lot of mischief making here, there, and everywhere.
Well, until next time, let us continue to plant the seeds of change so that we can grow together.
See you at the airport. I'm leaving on the next plane. I don't know when I'll be back again. Kiss me and smile for me. Tell me that you wait for me. Hold me like you know I'll never go. Even though you know I will, I'm a traveling man.